Our next speaker has presented at FuturePrint many times, actually. I'm sure you know him. Anyway, Dr. Simon Daplyn, and you've got a rather long title, so I'm going to leave that to you too, so I'll probably fall over the words or something. But anyway, welcome back, Simon, from Sun Chemical. Going to give us an enlightening and insightful talk, no doubt. Over to you.
Thank you, Marcus. Thanks, everybody. Great to be here. So, as mentioned, my name's Simon Daplyn. I'm the product and marketing manager at Sun Chemical for the digital business. And my talk's entitled Print, Pack, De-Ink, Repeat, a cycle for sustainability in digital print for packaging. And I noticed my boss has positioned himself on the front row, Steve, to make sure that I'm not going to cost him 4% of his revenue during the next 20 minutes. And you'll notice a theme throughout my presentation is I realized I was in the kind of siesta slot, the mid-afternoon kind of lull after lunch, after the beers and the wines. So with the title, we've gone for a bit of a rave theme and hopefully a pick-me-up during the process. So, Sun Chemical, as I'm sure most of you are aware, is one of the leading providers of solutions for the printing industry in terms of inks, coatings, primers, varnishes, across a range of industries and applications, with a particular focus both on analog and digital products within the packaging markets. And during the course of the next few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about why of digital, some potential repetition from earlier, but some messages that hopefully are good to reinforce. Talking a bit about de-inking, what it is, can it help make a difference? Some of the challenges associated with de-inking. It's becoming something that, as ink providers, we're asked about more and more. How it can potentially enable greater circularity within the print industry, particularly in the packaging space. Is it always needed? Is de-inking critical in every application? And then a bit about what's next and maybe some future thoughts. Now, a recurring theme when you talk to people about what has happened over the years is when we approach selling digital, sometimes within an established analog business like packaging, it often feels like we've got a mountain to climb, really, because there are so many challenges, and whilst these challenges have given us kind of targets to reach and to overcome, they're kind of still questions that exist pretty much in every discussion that we have. Are inkjets too slow? Being one of them. Well, is it? I mean, we've made huge advancements recently over the years in terms of print heads, in terms of processing power, software, color management, that all enables us to increase uptime, reducing waste. We've heard a lot about changeover times and setup costs and all these kind of things. So when we talk about too slow, are we considering the full end-to-end process? And at Drupal, we were seeing digital presses running up to 350 meters a minute, right? So that's a pretty good speed. Always the argument, and previously mentioned, is the ink's too expensive. The blocker for digital is the ink. And HP mentioned a lot about the kind of unseen and the hidden costs around waste and setup time and setup costs and value. But when you consider some of the other presentations that have been given, the ink is the brand, right? Once it's on the product, it is providing the representation of the brand. And you expect it to have a shelf life in the bottle, minimum of 12 months that you want to be able to use that with its performance. We heard today about the shelf life once it's been printed. Today was a minimum of 18 months, right? The ink has to perform post-print for a long period of time because of its representation of the brand. It also has to be fully compliant with industry standards and things like that. So if you kind of factor in everything, pretty good value, I'd say. Brand colors. You can't hit my brand color. Well, we just saw a presentation that said 93% of the brand colors were achievable just with CMYK. That's without even considering spot colors on top of that. And this argument that inkjet's good, but it's only really good for short run. And again, over the course of the last couple of days, we've certainly seen examples of where it's more than that. It's more than just short run. And maybe it's really now time to start thinking about the why we should be doing digital print and stop finding reasons why not to look at the technology. But if we do consider run length, this is some numbers from Sean Smith at Smithers. And there's no doubt that across the board within the packaging industry, run lengths are coming down, partly because of the revolution in e-commerce and the need to do more personalization, in-country versioning, and the need to be reactive and responsive in terms of supply chain management, printing on demand. So in every case, the share of volume that's printed under 5,000 square meters is increasing. So more and more production is done at shorter run lengths, which obviously plays into digital's favor, right? But the amount of packaging that's printed hasn't changed. So if the run lengths are getting shorter, that means there's an exponentially bigger number of jobs that need to be printed. Again, if you consider cylinder creation, set time, job changeovers, again, massively playing into digital hands. And just Sean mentioned at a recent conference that the predicted shift in carton board from 26 to 29% below 5,000 meters will result in 1 million extra print jobs that need to be printed. And you think of 1 million times of cylinders, 1 million times of job changeover, that's a huge expense. So it's just something to consider. But there's so many reasons, and we've heard throughout today some of the great reasons why digital print can allow brand owners and converters to do more with their business, to create more value for their customers in terms of the PPWR that we heard, things like packaging right sizing, which is coming, right? So you may have to have similar product with the same branding on the box, but in different box sizes, and how do you change the files? In inkjet, it's quite simple just to change the file size, the dimensions of the design. You can't do that so simply obviously with an analog process. You'll be able to align and communicate sustainability goals. It's massively important. We heard about the age ranges and the gaps there, but my 12-year-old niece recently realized that she's lactose intolerant, and so has to now choose an alternative. So is it almond milk, is it soy milk, is it coconut? And what really matters to her, because of the way she's been brought up and the young generation now, is she wants to know about the provenance, about the sustainability values of which of those is actually not only tastes good, but is beneficial or has the bigger sustainability credentials. And that all plays into Jenny's talk earlier about the connected packaging and be able to talk to the consumer through the medium of the packaging. So all of these things, unique QR codes, increasing numbers of SKUs, almost unique SKUs, individual SKUs within the same line of products, it's all only possible through application of digital. There's huge areas of value creation. So I'm going to move on to the de-inking and what it is and why everybody's talking about it and why it needs to be considered. When we consider the ink, as I mentioned, it really is an integral part of the finished packaging. It provides function, it provides information sharing, branding, promotion. It is part of the package. So, but the ink on the packaging also imparts safety, compliance, on-shelf and post-use kind of credentials or things to think about at least. And so obviously de-inking is the process of removing that print from the packaging during the post-processing in the recycling process or the moving the product through to the next phase. And hopefully, once you've de-inked your substrate, your fiber, your plastic, whatever it may be, you can then reuse it in different ways, maybe with a percentage of recycled component, adding it to fresh virgin rather than always using virgin material. So without de-inking, packaging can be harder to recycle, or it's recycled into lower grade product, and it decreases in value. So there's a lot of challenges, right, within that. As we heard yesterday from Steve, there's been huge advancements in the types of substrate that are being printed, right? And so as substrates change, we need to understand the processes of how to print, how to fix the ink. If you change the substrate, quite often the ink needs to change, right? There's not really a one ink fits on everything, and otherwise you're going to have to impart a primer or something like that. Ink durability is critical in the application performance, right? The fundamental requirement of the ink is that it sticks to the substrate, and then at the end we've got to get it off. Like, so it's quite a kind of paradox. You've got to consider the solute. So when we're de-inking, we're applying a solution of chemicals to try and remove the ink. But what happens to that? Does the ink go into that? What are you doing with the waste product? You have to think about that as a challenge of how you're going to make sure the process is still sustainable. Are there any contaminants within the material still? It's not just about color. There's other components, both in the ink and the de-inking chemicals, that potentially could end up within the recycled product at the end. And what does that mean for compliance in the ongoing use of that material? And then its overall environmental impact. What hasn't been mentioned and what we have to consider is that you've got to ensure the process of recycling and the benefits of that outweigh the potential environmental costs of the energy, the water, the chemicals management, everything else that's associated in the recycling process. Very briefly how it works, I just took two very simple cases of paper versus plastic and very simplified kind of breakdown of how it works. So in the paper world, it's pulping. I heard someone mention the word repulpable rather than recyclable yesterday in terms of paper substrate. So the paper is pulped, broken down into fibers. It's screened, so the ink or the chemicals are skimmed off the top. Air bubbles are introduced that removes or allows the ink particles to float to the surface, so they're easily separated from that. It's washed to remove any remaining inks or chemicals that may be there, and then potentially bleached for onward use. And that's pretty well established. Paper and board recycling is quite common, is quite well understood. In plastic, it's a little bit more complex. So usually the plastic's cut up into small pieces, washed, usually in a solution of caustic and other surfactants, and then a separation to remove the ink mechanically from the plastic so that the plastic can be reused. And that's where we're going to focus for the next couple of minutes. And if we look at the overall recycling process of plastics, you start with your new product, you use it, hopefully you put it in, you separate it correctly, you put it in the right recycling bin. That then is transported to the recycling facility where it's sorted in terms of size, density, color, because we're not talking about clear plastics always. There's black, gray, white plastics that all have to be separated and understood how that works. They're bundled and sent off to shredding. So that bottle, that PET bottle in this case, is shred down into primary particle parts, and then depending on what type of plastic it's made of, it goes through a different process. So again, like it's slightly different from the paper pulping, which is more or less a similar process for everything in plastic. More or less every single substrate has a different process that's applied to it. It's then, if you've removed everything that you want and you've got your material that's ready to be melted, reorganized, and then converted into new product, either as 100% recyclable or a component part with some version of a recycled content product. And so it's important we start to consider recycle-friendly ink solutions. And that doesn't mean that every ink is recycle-friendly. So within Sun Chemical, we looked at a number of applications, starting with things like sleeve labels for PET bottles and shrink sleeve films. And there's also promising results on other applications. But if we quickly look at this, you have your product that's then recycled. And we actually coined the term internally washable inks rather than de-inkable inks. So it goes through a washing process. And what you're looking for is, at the end of that process, to achieve premium quality, clean plastic flake at the end that can be then reused into the system, rather than stained, like the ink that hasn't been fully removed. You got rid of some of it. Some of it's remained on the plastic. It's stained it. You've got a contaminated wash solution. So some of the ink is in the wash solution. Some of the ink has remained on the plastic, and that means when it goes to be processed into fresh plastic, it's either going to be a very small percentage, or it's going to go to something like bin liners or something that's kind of downgraded the quality where the color of that doesn't really matter. So there's a lot to think about in how that's supported. So obviously, inks that can be removed and separated from recoverable plastic substrates, and not all plastic packaging is recoverable or recyclable. Obviously, if you've got multi-layer films or metallized, and it's got resins and kind of reverse print and lamination, there's lots of complexity in the packaging market. But if you can remove ink and separate it from recoverable plastic substrates, you can improve the recyclability of that packaging, and you can support some of those ongoing industry certifications and some of the new legislation that's coming in. Obviously, a higher quality and quantity of the flake that we get at the end of a de-inking and recycling process helps to use more material or increase the amount of recycled content in the ongoing product. And obviously, in this case, full transparency, this is a UV Flexo product. Digital's kind of a bit more tricky at the moment, especially in flexible packaging in areas like that, because everybody wants a water-based ink onto their flexible packaging now for compliance and other sustainability metrics. But to do that at the moment, you need to apply not only an ink, but a primer. And so there's two considerations in the post-processing. So there's a lot of work internally going on to investigate exactly what that means. And what we mean by washable versus conventional inks in this case is looking at a way of formulating the ink to produce filterable, non-bleeding ink particles in that caustic solution. And so that you need to think about your pigment selection, your resin selection. It's not going to be the same for every ink. So what we're looking for is when you remove the ink from the caustic, it's agglomerating into particles that you can then filter out during the process, leaving you with clean flake pigment, clean caustic solution that potentially, again, can be reused in the process, rather than a lot of inks today that can be considered de-inkable. So you're removing the ink, but you're staining the wash liquor, and it's much harder to recover that and reuse it, and you're going to have to take that through another chemicals cleaning process in order to be able to dispose of that as a waste product. So you get contamination in your washing liquor. You don't get fully clean plastic material, and you're clearly not filtering out in the same way as you can see on the left-hand side there. So it's about producing those filterable particles in that caustic solution so that we're removing all of the ink and we're getting as clean a flake at the end of the process as possible. But do we always need to de-ink? We talk about de-inking a lot, but there are many cases actually where de-inking is not what we want to do in the process of recycling. And so this is a digital label ink where we're recycling a plastic bottle that's got a label on. So it could be a BOPP label, for example, on a PET bottle. And in this case, it's important they're physically separable. So you can separate physically. That could be by mass, by density. And in both USA and EU within our regulations, they require the ink to be retained on the label. So you don't want the ink to come out in the post-processing. You want the ink to stay on the label to allow you to recover the plastic of the bottle that had the label on it in the first place. So in this case, this is a printed label with a graphic design, just a standard representation on the left-hand side. It's gone through an APR test, which is a test that's specified by the Association of Plastic Recyclers, through a caustic wash, stirred at 1,000 RPM, 15 minutes, and then it's rinsed with water for 5 minutes. And here what you're looking for, or what we were able to achieve, is clear wash liquor with a clear rinse, clean PET flakes after that APR test, and the ink is retained on that shredded label piece. So the ink stays on the label. Yeah, it's a waste product, but it's allowing you then to take that plastic into the next stage of recycling and use it again, hopefully within the process. It's important to say that when the label or the sleeve is not separable, so if you've got something like a CPET sleeve on a PET bottles or a polyolefin label on an HDPE product, for example, then you need to de-ink to prevent the color contamination of the plastic being recycled. So again, different rules for different substrate combinations, and it's not a simple de-inking, not de-inking this plastic, or the same process is available for all plastics, which is why the area of plastic packaging is so complex. And there's pressure. So in the EU today, it's mandated that all labels are retention labels. So you want the ink to stay on the label. But there's actually a lot of pressure downwards from the brands that want to move that to a de-inkable solution rather than a retention solution. So the landscape is continually changing, and so the technology needs to adapt to allow us to continue to be compliant with the onward post-processing. So if we look into the future of where we're going, the challenges, some of the developments, we've heard a lot about the increased use of different materials, of monomaterials in plastic to allow pouches to be easier to recycle, new materials within the sign and display markets. But there's a greater adoption of paper-based packaging, but often that means that we need to have barrier coatings as well, right? We're looking at barrier layers, so you're applying another form of chemistry, which then, what happens to that? What do we need to think about? So there are still de-inking questions or de-coating questions to answer. But there's a huge amount of innovation. If you look at the IP landscape, there's loads of patents going in at the moment around de-inking. Some of the stuff we're working on using natural-based, bio-based materials within inks that the way they work and complex means that they provide a very strong coating, but something that's quite easy to remove with the caustic process. Looking at other processes to ensure the de-inking, the contamination of processes so that once you've removed it, even if it's in solution, it's not going to stain the plastic. There's a lot of work going on in there. There's a lot of work in new materials, resins, oligomers, UV monomers that will form films that are easier to de-ink. And then a lot of companies also are looking at primers that allow you to remove the full ink solution more cleanly by not having the ink necessarily adhering to the substrate itself, but adhering to the primer that's then interfacing with the substrate. So just to summarize, I think inkjet technology, I think we can all agree the technology is there. It's reached a level where inkjet has a massive role to play in the future of printing packaging. And really, we need to start eulogizing on the reasons why to use digital, not just focusing on the things that digital sometimes struggles with. Packaging and recycling initiatives, we heard a lot about that, and the more we can de-ink, the more we can play a role within that, the simpler these commitments are going to be for companies to make. And technologies are continually evolving and being put into place to enable better recycling, extending the use of materials, allowing them to be used again and again rather than being downgraded into lower quality products and their end of life. So for sure, challenges still remain, especially in the digital space, but new developments can further enable a greater circularity within the printing industry. So that's it for me. If you have any questions or context, my information's up there and we'd be very happy to discuss any of that with you further.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Simon. Very good. Thank you. Exactly on time. Very, very obedient. Well done. Very well.